You're listening to Switched On Australia, the podcast that tracks the opportunities and challenges of the renewable energy transition and electrifying everything everywhere. Switched On is proudly brought to you by Boundless Earth. Boundless Earth uses philanthropy, investment and direct advocacy to help Australia become a global force in a decarbonised world. Switched On is also brought to you by Goodwee, the all-in-one ESA battery system safely powering Aussie homes, lowering bills and providing energy independence. And Switched On is also brought to you by Amp Control, an Australian manufacturer helping to power the energy transition. Hello, I'm Anne Delaney. Thanks for joining me on Switched On Australia. The Electrify 2515 project, based in the Illawarra south of Sydney, is one of Australia's most ambitious real-world electrification trials. And we've talked about the pilot project here on Switched On a couple of times already. It's following hundreds of households as they switch from gas to efficient electric appliances, as they install solar and batteries and test smarter ways of using energy. Now, the project is collecting detailed evidence on what it takes to electrify homes at scale, what motivates people to electrify, what gets in the way, and also what happens to the local electricity network when a whole community starts to make the shift. And that's important because one of the big questions hanging over household electrification is whether our local grids can cope, or whether we'll need to spend billions building more poles and wires. A key partner of Electrify 2515 is Endeavour Energy. This is the electricity distributor responsible for operating and planning the electricity network for around 1.2 million homes and businesses across Greater Western Sydney, the Blue Mountains, the Southern Highlands, the Illawarra and the South Coast. And within the 2515 postcode, Endeavour supplies around 5,000 customers. So it makes it an ideal test bed for understanding what happens when an entire community begins to electrify. Joining me today is Endeavour Energy's General Manager of Future Grid and Asset Management, Colin Crisafulli. Colin Crisafulli, thanks so much for joining the Switched On podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Anne.
Now, Colin, a fundamental purpose of the Electrify 2515 project is to identify all the challenges and the friction points, the bottlenecks at a local level that will need to be addressed if we're going to make electrification more scalable at the big level, at the national level. When the Electrify 2515 project was first conceived, what were the biggest unknowns from a network perspective? Because that's how you are part of this project. What did you hope to learn?
That's a great question. For us, like electrification, like we know the electrification journey is going to happen, and that it's going to take, call it various paths. And when I sort of expand on that, I think it's more that there's no single path to electrification. Consumers have different needs, have different motivators, have different means as well. And I think for us, it was kind of understanding what are those motivations, what are those barriers, and then, ultimately, as a grid, it's to think about, well, how do you best prepare for that future? How do you make sure customers can confidently invest in this technology, and that the grid will support it in the most efficient way?
So a lot of public debate has assumed that widespread electrification is going to overwhelm our local networks. Based on what you've seen so far, are those concerns at all justified?
Look, not justified, right? I think, one of maybe the biggest push or the biggest learning, we were looking to take from this project was just that, right? So yes, there has been a lot of, call it debate and concern about, there used to be the example of, well, everyone's going to buy an EV and plug it in at 6 o'clock, and then, that's while the air conditioners are on, and you sort of start to run into challenges on a grid. You do genuinely start to run into challenges, but the behaviours don't reflect that, right? And I'm taking a broader view around electrification rather than just 2515 here. A big part for us is how do we double what the grid can do? Like, we're going to see a doubling of the usage of the grid. How do we double what the grid can do without necessarily doubling the size of the grid? And a lot of that is about understanding behaviours, understanding how we can help consumers get value out of the investments that they're making. But also for us, looking around, not just building poles and wires. We're quite good at building poles and wires, but actually, how do we incentivize customers to really behave in ways that means that the grid itself can certainly handle a lot more electrification without having to build costly infrastructure.
But just looking at Electrify 2515, what have you learnt so far about incentivising that behaviour? And has network demand increased to date as much as anticipated?
Yeah, so demand has increased in the location. I think we have seen some of the customers, I'd say, have a doubling of consumption. They have, particularly the ones that are fully electrified, so gone off gas cooktops and also invested in an EV, and so they have, in fact, sort of doubled their usage. But that doesn't mean that they've necessarily doubled, from network's perspective, doubled their demand.
Mm-hmm.
So it's so our concern has always been, or our challenge has been, how do we service, sort of all of the customers, call it at once, and when they're at their most usage. So for grid like Endeavour Energy, so we have large industrial base, we have a large residential base, but we are still largely building our network to supply what is a couple of hot days in summer. So it's when all the air conditioners come on at 6 o'clock. And so that's really what the grid is designed and built around. And I think when you then bring it down to a local house level or a local community level, there's always differences. But what we're probably seeing is, we have had houses that have doubled in consumption. We've had houses that have increased that aren't part of the program itself, but they're just electrifying because many customers are electrifying, and word of mouth and these things are also all supporting that. But none of those behaviours at this point are leading us to a concern that the grid can't handle it. Quite the opposite. The grid is absolutely ready for electrification, and as a network operator or as a grid operator, our focus around developing value propositions for customers, be they incentives, be they products and services that aren't just building more infrastructure, actually getting customers, allowing customers to export more solar, allowing customers to get a better rate if they can move their hot water system into, call it peak solar abundance periods or overnight. And these are things that we're learning even through this project of many of these products and services we already have. But actually the electrification journey, particularly in a local community, just heightens the awareness that these are available. And I think, particularly at this community, like call it the neighborhood effect is enormous, right? So you've got people that are really talking about electrification, right? Like it's not every community that, openly talks about electrification, and ways in which they're saving money, ways in which they're thinking about energy efficiency, ways in which they're sort of moving off gas for other reasons. Like I think it just becomes part of the call it conversation that you then start to think about. There are many ways you solve, call it electrification, really sort of embrace what we're seeing, which is essentially that consumer behaviour is the biggest influence of what a grid needs to do.
So all those what we call, demand management scenarios, what you're seeing with this project, the reality on the ground is working. And what we need to do is to actually scale up some of that demand management in order so we don't have to double the size of the grid.
Yeah. I think this community is a great example of what that looks like. I sort of take a broader view. Like one of my, I don't know, favorite devices in a home or technology is call it the humble domestic hot water system, and not the, call it, most efficient kind, so not the heat pump kind, but the old resistor with a heat tank sort of sitting on the side of the home. I think for us, we think about them sometimes as demand management programs, and this example is customers can go onto our off-peak product. That's a cheaper rate for energy and a good quality hot water service. Like that was the product, that was the service that was being offered. It wasn't an energy flexibility or a demand management product. It is that for us, and it helps us make sure we can build the most efficient grid and make sure that customers can invest in technology and sort of confidently. And I think this is probably the bigger learning for us as a grid operator coming from 2515 and many of our other projects is actually the more you can focus on developing, call it products and services that really speak to customers in terms of what it means for them. Like a hot water system is for hot water. It's not a demand management device.
Yes, yes.
The more you start to change the dial around, how customers can actually then not so much understand, but actually make sure that there's a party that's looking after their interests. It's speaking in a language that's relevant to what they're actually trying to get from the technology, which is often not energy. It's something else, right? It could be control, it could be hot water service, it could be transport, right? And so I think maybe call it one of the biggest learnings for us as a network operator or as a grid operator from this project and from many others is actually the more we start to understand what's essentially customer behavior, the more we can also use that to influence how much grid we need to build or not build to be able to enable that.
Doesn't that come down to giving households, consumers a good deal, though?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my example with hot water is a great one. It was again like lower rate
Mm.
and a guaranteed hot water service. Like that was the offer. And so a lot of it is about finding ways that we can see from a grid perspective, way to get good utility out of the grid. Like that's ultimately what we're driven to do. And by that I mean how much of the grid you can use or avoid those peak hot days, for instance. How much of that energy can be shifted because that's what drives the infrastructure decision. That's what drives the cost of the service we need to provide. And so it's about creating good deals for customers to be able to get value out of their investments, but then from our side, being able to incentivize, call it that behaviour as well.
A lot of these good deals, though, come down to the retailers, though, don't they? How do you, as the network, seeing what is going on, incentivise the retailers to give households those good deals?
That is a great question. I think that's one we tackle a lot, and I think and maybe to put it in a bit of context, so Endeavour Energy develops for instance, its tariffs, its prices, its other value propositions, and packages them up for retailers, and it's up to retailers to kind of take those and then develop a product and sort of a service for a customer. Now, many retailers mimic what a network does, many don't, and that's the market we do have. There's sort of open access choice to the retail partner. But what we are finding is more and more, particularly as we engage directly with retailers and directly with customers, ones that develop products that customers can really relate to, call it the product that's kind of related to their needs. It might be, I am a household with solar, with batteries, with an EV, with a heat pump. And so I'm a higher energy user. I'm a prosumer as well because I generate electricity. And I want to make sure that the party I'm engaging with has developed a product that kind of works for me. I trust that it's structured in a way that aligns to me. It can be very different for a different customer, right? Particularly those without the means, for instance, to invest in these technologies. Like I do think it can become quite complex. Like we talk about, networks developing products and services and tariffs, passing them to retailers and retailers packaging sort of various products. But I do think there is a role in which that can really, I think, connect more closely to what customers see as this is the one that's better aligned to my needs, and that can change over time. And so I think we are seeing that increasingly more now than we probably saw even a few years ago. The sorts of products that you see from retail are very different to flat rate, same price, no matter when you used it, probably of 5 years ago, they still exist because there's a good base of customers that want that. But there's also increasingly customers that are investing in these technologies and want to make sure that sort of they're getting the right signals and incentives to sort of make that choice around, well, I can behave a particular way and pay a bit more or pay a bit less, depending on that, but it's a choice I've made.
And as more consumer energy resources become more available to more people, they obviously have to respond to that. And one of them is obviously electric vehicles. Now, the 2515 pilot doesn't actually include EVs, but have you been able to learn anything about the impact that the additional electric machines will have on the grid?
Yeah, we have. And so no necessarily incentive within the scheme itself for 2515 for electric vehicles, but there is a large number of electric vehicles sort of in the community. Is quite an early adopter actually of EVs, and there are already thousands sort of in the community. What we're probably seeing is everyone's different. We're seeing that a lot of behaviour, particularly in this location, we are seeing EVs, for instance, plug in when the solar is generating. It makes a lot of sense. It usually means that solar energy is going straight into the EV. You're not paying for grid. You're not paying for a retail service. It's very much in your hands. And we're seeing others that charge it at different times. I think what we're seeing, like there's a great diversity of customers in this community. I think that the example I gave earlier of a customer doubling in consumption, I think they grew from about 35 kilowatt hours a day up to about 80 on average, right, is because they had gone fully electric, including an EV. But that didn't, there was the same customer that didn't see a doubling, for instance, at that 6 p.m. peak. Actually, the behavior indicated that most of that consumption has occurred without increasing the need or the sort of the draw off the grid itself, actually, because it's actually been quite spread out. But I do think that there is a big learning in this for us around. It sounds obvious, but everybody's different, right? And I think we've got 1.2 million homes that Endeavour Energy supplies us, and they're all different. I think members within that house are very different, and so it's interesting to be able to learn and understand what are those differences, what drives them, and because ultimately it's behaviour that we're trying to understand.
Okay, we'll take a short break and we'll be back right after this message from one of our sponsors.
G'day, Alex Carey here, proud ambassador for GoodWe. The GoodWe ESA 3060 all-in-one commercial solution is available now from GoodWe wholesalers. With a massive 50 kilowatt hours of the battery eligible for the federal rebate, it's the perfect solution for small businesses. The commercial energy storage range from GoodWe is growing, with more models launching soon. Visit goodwe.com.au for more information or contact the local GoodWe team.
My guest today on Switch on Australia is Colin Crisafulli, who's the General Manager of Future Grid and Asset Management at Endeavour Energy. And we're talking about the Electrify 2515 project. This is the ambitious electrification trial that's aiming to electrify 500 homes in the Illawarra region south of Sydney. Now, one of the ambitions of Electrify 2515 was to test whether smart energy devices or home energy devices could actually help households use electricity more flexibly and change their behaviour. What have you learned about how well these systems are performing in the real world?
Oh, look, I think we've run plenty of research that comes out of 2515, but we've also got a lot of focus groups where we probably tackle this very question. I think we do find it very interesting that there's probably a recency bias. So I think when you've just installed all of the smart kit, particularly I always use the example of someone that installs their solar system tends to have an app on their phone the next day, tends to open the app for the next few weeks, and then eventually sort of it just becomes it's not regularly open.
Yes.
But I think in that process, I think what's interesting is there is a lot of learning that occurs, right? There is a understanding that actually, like there is a solar profile, which makes sense when the sun's out. And so that if I shift my energy into that, sort of into that, call it solar abundance period, that's energy I'm not paying for, right? I've paid for it through the capital investment I've made in a solar system, but I'm not paying the grid for that. And so I think a lot of what we see, it's hard always to just draw the direct correlation between, for instance, a home energy management system or getting apps on your phone and things like that. I think a lot of it helps customers understand how energy works and what it means for bills, what it means for other things. Then know, like actually, I can change the shape, right? I can put the washing on in the middle of the day if I can, right? There's things that I think then create that knowledge that ultimately then influence that behaviour. I think then when you lift that up to call it the products and services or the retail products, you then start to say actually there are ones that are more closely linked to sort of the behaviour or my household needs. This one has a discount overnight, and that's when I tend to charge my car, or I'm home enough on the weekend that I feel like I can charge it in the middle of the day because that product's more aligned to, call it a solar type of home. It then allows people to kind of link, call it that knowledge that comes from, call it smart devices and things like that to behaviour. Often then leads to actually there are some products and particularly technologies that where they're happy to hand over like a view of orchestration to someone else, because it's like, well, it's like the hot water example is another good one. Someone's going to take care of that for me. They've promised to, and I'm going to have hot water and I'm going to have a cheaper rate. Like that's a good, like I'm happy to just hand that one over, provided that's the guarantee I get. Right? And so I think there are examples for various technologies that are very similar to that.
Have there been any surprises for you as a network with the data that you've been collecting from the smart energy devices?
Yeah, I mean, there is. I think part of our role in this project, we installed, call it 40 smart, sort of devices even on our infrastructure. So we understand what's happening at a customer level. There's, it's got 5,000 meters on customer homes in the area, including participants and non-participants. We've got monitors sort of deeper up in the network, and a lot of it just gives us insight to know when we might need to trigger an investment, for instance. That's often been the way we sort of play this out. I think the team gave me the stats. I think we've got over 1 billion data points in the last year and a half on this project. So there's no absence of data, even sitting within 2515. Each of the data points, though, does tell a different story. It tells a different customer journey. It tells there are customers that will electrify, and then you see the change in behaviour occur over time. You don't see it straight away. And I think that's just, again, people going on their own electrification journey, understanding what it means and where it goes. And so I think, maybe one of the biggest insights is, it sounds intuitive, but like everyone's different.
I'm intrigued by that, though, with all those data points. Does that mean that when you go to the regulator and you say, well, we need, more poles and wires for particular areas, you'll be actually able to show really hard data as opposed to the past when you've had to anticipate?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big part of it. I think the other big part of us, sort of what we take to the regulator is we very much have a flex first kind of mind to this. And so a lot of those data points are telling us that, consumer behavior is ultimately the driver of the investments we need to make. And yes, you can respond to consumer behavior and sort of understand it more. And that's really what it's telling us. It's how do you call it trigger the investment at the most efficient time. Like that's often been our challenge. But I think when we step back and look at maybe some of the broader learnings coming from this project and others, is actually how do we maybe invest in value propositions for customers? Like, one of the products we have out at the moment is our flexible exports sort of product. It's also been applied in 2515. They're about 70% solar down there. So, 7 in 10 homes have solar. It's about 1 in 3 across our whole network. So they're certainly lovers of solar. And the challenge has always been if everyone's generating at the same time, again, can the grid cope with that? And what, for instance, the flexible exports product does is, customers that elect to go onto it can export more most of the time, and then you can, throttle it back if there is a grid constraint. If there's a grid constraint, or if there is a system security concern, and really what you're trying to do is develop a product that 99% of the time puts more value in the sort of pocket of customers, but you're doing it in a way that actually doesn't require you to invest in poles and wires. I mean that's a that's a customer management system. That's a product. It's a tariff that's designed that avoids infrastructure, but also allows customers to get the most out of their investments. And so a lot of, I think, what we then take to the regulator is actually that story is how do we make sure we've used everything we can in the grid. We've really empowered customers as much as we can, and only then are we talking about potentially upgrading infrastructure. And I think that's the opportunity that comes from these sorts of projects, and admittedly also comes from having billions of data points, because actually it's staring at you in the face. It's almost too much data.
Yes. How often have you had to throttle back all that solar that's coming off the roofs in 2515?
I don't have the numbers for 2515, but it'd be quite small, and I think the would probably be less than 1% of the time throttling it back. And most of this is a lot of these are still trial products and things, and so a lot of it is still in learning. I think what we found probably in 2515 is a lot of that solar was installed quite early, so they were very early adopters of solar. What we're probably seeing, and this is again probably more broadly, is people are now coming up to a phase in which they're upgrading or replacing their original solar system with their, call it their next one. They've kind of, call it 15 years in to their solar journey, and for the same, call it area, sort of a roof space area, just given the technological improvements we've seen in solar and PV, like it's about double the size. From memory, the average solar system down there was sitting at about 4 or 5 kilowatts, but the average being installed now is sort of getting closer to 10 kilowatts. And so I think some of these call it challenges and opportunities are really just starting to surface now as customers are electrifying and solar systems are doubling, and then they're making a choice of an EV, and it's kind of like the combination of all of these things that we're really, I think, grappling with.
Now, initially, there was an issue with some of the electrification terminology for some 2515 participants. You needed to change the language of home energy management systems, HEMS, I believe, to smart energy devices. What have you learnt about why wording matters so much when talking to households about electrification?
Yeah, look, I think this is, I think we're really guilty in the industry of this, is that home energy management system, like just in language, like it doesn't sound like a device you'd normally buy, right? And I mean, you can go and buy one. There's plenty available, and because it doesn't really like it talks about energy management.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how like a grid would think about it. That's probably how sort of the manufacturers of the HEMS would think about it. I mean, smart energy devices itself is a way in which you're just trying to describe what it is. You've invested in technology. It has some smarts, and so you don't have to necessarily go and switch it on and off yourself. You can actually start to, sort of manage your home, right? Like you can manage timers and things like that, but in more sophisticated ways than maybe have been available in the past. I think it does reveal. I mean, all of our discussion today has probably revealed that, like, one of the challenges we have, I think, in the electrification journey and the energy transition more broadly, is that the language we tend to use, and I'm talking as a grid operator, we'll talk about it in the language that we're familiar with, right? Energy management, we're very familiar with energy management. That's kind of our job.
Yeah.
But that's not how, like, customers do not see their investment in technology, the cooktop, the hot water system, the EV, as energy management devices. It's a cooker, it's the car, right? And so I think the learning, particularly around language, and I think this is a real like industry learning, is how do we get clearer around almost like the value propositions for customers, or understand how customers see technology and electrification, because it's very different. And I think the benefit is really when you come at it from multiple minds, you'll start to develop some very unique understandings that like neither party has in isolation. And I do think that's yeah, language is very important.
I think this is where, people who are advocates of energy efficiency have it all over some other people in the industry, because they prioritise comfort in the home, making your homes comfortable. And that's how householders think. They want to be comfortable, and they do want a good deal.
Yeah, look, I 100% agree. And I think maybe go a layer deeper. I think the understanding, and again, I'll take a grid operator perspective, is and comfort is a really good sort of signal for that, is different technologies have different levels of comfort, right? And air conditioner is a great example, because people can talk to like being in a comfortable temperature, right? And the idea of a grid operator coming in and controlling a air conditioner is not a good thing. That's actually a direct impact on comfort. But I think it does start to open the discussion about different technologies do provide means to be able to get a better deal, right? Maintain comfort or improve comfort, right? But also create a good, call it energy, again, management sort of product.
Yeah.
Because I think that then creates this environment where I think comfort is the perfect term for it, but also that the grid does not get over invested in out of a fear that it's going to, sort of behaviour is going to, turn against us, and we're going to have to come back and upgrade all of the wires all of a sudden. And so I do think really getting to that level of understanding, which is really core for us in this project, is how do we actually understand motivators, behaviours, and what it actually means for then how we, as a grid operator, empower that, right? And empower that choice and really respond appropriately.
Now, one of the other things that 2515 is, I suppose, testing at a local level is getting installers on board. How has the project gone to date with getting installers who are ready to participate in full electrification?
Yeah, look, I think, that was one of the big learnings for us in this project. Again, in others, the role of installers is huge in the energy transition. Solar installers, heat pump installers. Probably already heard the story of place a gas cooktop with a electric, induction cooktop, and you'll need to engage an electrician, a plumber, and a stone cutter potentially,
Yes.
right? Now that does not sound like an easy journey for customers.
No, it's a pain in the.
Yes, right. And so, and I do think what we're probably finding from installers are actually a very trusted party in the energy transition. Like, when you hand over your money to someone to install a solar system, tends to be you check reviews, you talk to the neighbor, you want to have confidence that you're getting someone in that's going to be reputable, that's going to be there if there's warranty issues, things like that. And so I think what we're finding with installers is installers are on a journey as well. And if a customer does elect to go from gas to electric on their cooktop, that is actually quite a substantial shift compared to replacing a hot water system and things like that. It's probably one of the bigger ones. And actually the installer environment that can do that in a way that's seamless for customers, that's need to go to one party,
Not cost prohibitive.
not cost prohibitive. I think that's really where sort of where we're going, even with our installer cohort. We engage with installers a lot, particularly solar installers at the moment, as we're looking at establishing a bunch of new processes as well. I think our job is to make their job easy, but I think because they ultimately are the ones that tend to be they tend to be at the kitchen table with the customers when they're giving the quotes and things like that. They're the ones that often give the initial information. And so I think a lot of what we're probably seeing is installers are probably on a journey themselves, and there are some that are sort of embracing this very quickly, and others that aren't, and that's just, I think, probably the nature of maybe installer transition as well.
I was also wondering, you mentioned, switchboards. I understand that initially over a fifth of households had to undertake a switchboard upgrade, which I think that was more than what you were all anticipating. Has that continued with Electrify 2515 as it's scaling up?
Look, to an extent, I think we're finding other ways in which you can avoid switchboard installs, and so I think some of the earlier CTs were getting clicked on in switchboards. There were modifications. I think it helped us, sort of appreciate that there are probably other technologies and smart switches and things that don't require switchboard upgrades. But I think in some circumstances it has, and I think we're finding this. Sort of we're working very closely at the moment with smart meter rollout across the entire network, across the entire state, and that's one of the biggest challenges we work through is when you identify sites that have been 50 to 60 years old, that probably have asbestos and other materials in them. There is a time in which you want to upgrade that and make that safe, but that can create fairly significant cost burden on the party. Like, there are ways in which we are approaching that, but I do think we, as an industry, we are tackling that challenge of call it switchboard replacements, because it is something that occurs, and I mean, don't have to do it every year or so, but like every 50 to 60 years tends to be about the rate at which switchboards do need to be replaced, because the technology that you're installing today is vastly different to what was there 50 or 60 years ago.
So have installations costed more than was anticipated?
I think there's been a bit of a mix. Like, I think when the project kicked off, I think we also had quite early on the idea of incentive on batteries. Obviously, we're fortunate that the cheaper home battery scheme sort of came in, so that didn't. And that was probably one of the biggest cost items. I think we are finding a mix of experience. I think the average sort of costs we were expecting, like, I think averages are probably quite similar, but I think we're seeing very large differences depending on home circumstances, depending on how much work is required to actually potentially run new circuits, to potentially disconnect gas. That's part of. I mean, we're kind of midway through the project now, and I think that's one of the continual learnings is the experience is very different, right? And I think understanding that and then being able to find ways in which you can better mitigate that, or better provide upfront information around what might be the cost, what might be the barriers, what have others experienced, because not every experience is the same.
Now, you mentioned batteries, and when this project first started, or even when it was, kind of getting off the ground, there was a lot of interest in batteries, but they were too expensive for most people. And as you mentioned, since then, we've had the federal government's cheaper home batteries rebate. I was wondering, what impact is that having on the pilot project? Because I can imagine that a lot of installers, they're overworked with getting these batteries into houses, because there's been it's just turbocharged, the battery installations. Has that actually had a positive or a negative impact on the pilot?
I'd say probably both, right? I mean, positive overall, right? But I do think there is a demand for battery install. There is a significant demand for battery installs across, frankly, across probably the nation, the state, and we're seeing that. We're seeing that across our grid. I think we're a few years ago, it was still under 1,000 batteries across, call it 1.2 million homes, and we're sort of across our grid now, probably sitting at about 30 to 40,000, right? And it just ramped up in the last, call it 12 to 18 months on the back of the scheme. It's had a great impact on improving the amount of solar that can come into the grid. We're seeing fairly significant shifts in demand. So we are seeing some really positive results of that scheme. And in 2515, the same. I think the challenge, though, is, yes, I think if you're choosing between devices, you might prioritize a battery over replacing your induction cooktop, because it can have a higher, potentially a higher value proposition to you, depending on your means. And so I think that is part of the challenge we faced as well in the project of, are there, call it technologies that probably provide greater benefit in terms of a hip pocket and incentive than, for instance, going on to sort of a heat pump or a sort of induction cooktop, right? And so I think so we have found that. I think we see that it's all part of the electrification journey. Many people are going on that. It's essentially almost coming up with their electrification roadmap that each one of the customers tends to go through.
Now, the project was always going to have challenges around electrifying apartments and, in particular, renters. What proportion of your participants in the pilot are renters and apartment dwellers?
Yeah, I don't have the stats in front of me, but it is relatively low, right? And I think there are challenges. Like, I think the split incentive challenge is what's there. It's call it the beneficiary of that technology is often the person living in the home. If they're not the homeowner, it may not have the incentive to necessarily invest in that technology. I think that's one of the big challenges we do have for electrification. I think it's one of the biggest challenges we have for the energy transition. So those, with the means, and that might be home ownership in this instance, are probably, sort of closer to being able to get the benefits from it. So the proportion is low. I think that in itself is a learning. I think there was, we've been very active in trying to, sort of engage, call it with landlords, with others to try and really get, sort of the benefits more broadly, because there are benefits for landlords as well. But I do think that is, to be really frank, I think that is one of the challenges we do have in any electrification journey, is that call it the beneficiary of it is often the person who is using it, who owns it. Yeah, the incentive might not always be there, for instance, for the landlord.
Yeah, a lot more work has to be done on that front, I think. Just a couple of final questions. What would you like householders to take away from this experiment? That's householders on one hand. And what's the most important lesson that you think Electrify 2515 has delivered for network businesses so far?
Yeah, I mean, great questions to sort of close on. I think what to take away is, I mean, you almost kicked off the discussion with it, the concern or the fear that the grid won't be able to cope. I think everything we've seen is it absolutely will cope. If anything, it's call it increased our resolve around making sure that how it copes is the smartest way, the most efficient way in making it cope. And so really removing that fear that electrification is going to require the grid to double. I think it's just going to require us to do double with the grid. That's really what what sort of call households to take away. And that, I think we're here to kind of help that journey. I think sort of grid operators are really trying to develop call it those products. I think develop these learnings so that the electrification journey does get easier. Yeah, we're certainly committed to and really pushing for that. I think for grid operators like us, I mean, it's almost the same learning. It's that call it the behaviours are the biggest determinant of what we need to do for our service, what we need to build. And so being able to influence and shape those behaviours by ensuring customers have control, are empowered, can make choice, and really that we're making sure that we're focused on the right products and services to be able to, for them to have confidence in the energy transition, but also to make sure that the grid itself can handle it in the most smart and efficient way.
Now, just final one. If you could push for just one immediate reform off the back of this pilot, what would it be?
I mean, that's a hard one. I often get asked this question by sort of board members and other things as well, and I often go into some pretty deep spaces. So I should have practiced this one, because I've had many turns. It probably shows I've just not learnt properly. But I think we are going through a fairly significant transition, and I think what we're probably seeing is customers, consumers becoming really active participants in the energy transition. And I think that's like, call it the macro, call it sort of driver that's sitting behind here. I think when I then talk to like what needs to change, I think it's more that we just acknowledge that that's occurring, because I think it's then how do we approach, brought up the regulatory framework. I mean, how do we approach the regulator? How do we think about, sort of how we price tariffs, for instance? How do we potentially enable things like peer-to-peer markets and things like that? But really, I think what it tends to do is then sort of drive a very different solution set to like what's essentially occurring, which is that we're probably seeing a decentralization of energy. And so we need to sort of make sure our market structures, the way we value the service, the way we're incentivized keeps pace with that.
I think the board would be pleased with that answer, surely. Colin Crisafulli, thanks so much for joining the Switched On podcast today.
Been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
And Colin Crisafulli is the General Manager, Future Grid and Asset Management at Endeavour Energy. We'll check in again with one of the Electrify 2515 partners when there are more insights on how things are going. Thanks for listening today. I'm Anne Delaney, and I hope you can join me again on Switched On Australia for more conversations with people who are at the forefront of Australia's electrification journey. Until then, take care. Switched On Australia was proudly brought to you by AMP Control, an Australian manufacturer combining engineering expertise, electrical solutions and innovative technologies to enable Australia's energy future. Switched On Australia is also proudly brought to you by Boundless Earth. Boundless Earth uses philanthropy, investment and direct advocacy to help Australia become a global force in a decarbonised world. And Switched On Australia was also brought to you by Goodwee. Goodwee's all-in-one ESA home battery helps Australians store more of their own solar energy and rely less on the grid. With strong local support and technology already trusted in thousands of homes, Goodwee is making the switch to electrification simpler and more affordable. Goodwee is proud to work with Australian cricketer and Goodwee ambassador Alex Carey. Find out more at goodwee.com.au.